Hi, fellow tea lovers. Settle in because we've got a story. I'm Nell.
And I'm Rose, and today we're bringing you the tea.
Across eras. Okay, to start this episode, what is your skincare routine? You don't have to tell me what it is, but how many steps do you have, including washing to moisturizing?
Probably 4.
Oh, snap. I gotta be honest, I said yesterday, I bet my co host has less than you do, and she had 3.
Oh, no kidding!
I was imagining that you were like a wash and moisturize. Well, unless you're wearing makeup.
I actually make coffee before I do anything in the morning, and my electric kettle at the very end has this just beautiful cloud of steam. So I stand over it and blink the whole time that it's boiling.
Genius.
And it's relaxing, that sticky eye thing you wake up with. It's just a weird habit that I picked up, but I super count that as part of my skincare routine.
No, I don't think that's weird at all. It is. And we're going to talk about that a little bit today about people's homemade skincare routines and how it worked. Maybe not their routines. We'll get into that more in the modern age, but what people used and what it was made of. Yesterday, I was at a birthday party for my coworker's kid, and I asked her how many steps she had because I knew she's fairly new to like the serum game. So I was like, hey, what are your steps? And she was all laughs at me and she goes, 3. And I was like, okay. I got to remembering today the place where we used to work that we don't name. They had at that time just a single serum. And then a couple years ago, they had 4 or 5, and I think they're back down to maybe 2 or 3 again.
Mm-hmm.
But I really like their serum.
I don't think it's as broad a concept, like face wash, moisturizer, everybody's gonna kind of dip into that. Serum is, I think, for the specialist a little bit more.
I might change your mind.
Really?
Which brings me to my second point. When my coworker was saying, haha, I only have 3, she goes, I wash my face, I put on my serum, and then I moisturize. It reminded me, her, and our other former coworker, we go to lunch every so often. And right before the holidays, we went out to lunch, and I was saying what was on my niece's Christmas list, and I bought them everything on their list
because you're an auntie. That's your prerogative.
Yeah, I can. That's why, because I can. So their last holiday season, we started seeing a lot of social media talk. Well, okay, I did because I'm behind the times. That these young teens and preteens and tweens or whatever you want to call them, that they're having these complicated skincare routines that are way too advanced for their skin. But I guess one really popular thing was to make like a skincare smoothie where you put all your serums together and then put them all on.
It's a salad bowl.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I found out that's not actually a great way to do it, that if you're going to use multiple steps, you need to layer them so that your skin can properly absorb them.
Well, that's because they're each made to do a specific thing. If you're all just blending it together, that's stepping backwards.
Exactly. So I saw on their Christmas list, and these were things I knew I was going to see on there because about August, September, I start reading those lists that are like 75 BuzzFeed things that we saw on TikTok that are super cool and you need. So I read those. So
it's amazing how much of Christmas comes from lists like that.
Well, it's helpful because I'm not a young teen like my nieces are. So I don't always know what's cool, right? So I'll buy them everything that's cool in advance. You start doing your shopping in September, you get sales. So you can really like
work it out.
Yeah. So I saw brands on their list like Drunk Elephant, Glow Recipe, Laneige. And honestly, I wasn't that surprised to see them there, but I did end up having to do this research. Like, is it okay if a 12-year-old uses a product with niacinamide? It's a type of vitamin B3. In Glow Recipes product Dewdrops, which is like a super viral product, it's in there. And so I ended up starting my research on TikTok. But when I found like the general opinion from someone who said they were a dermatologist or a doctor, then I would go verify it. That ingredient is okay in low doses. But then we also have Drunk Elephant's viral products called DeBronzi Sunshine Drops. I really like it. It's basically like liquid gold. But that has things in it I didn't know. So I watched all these videos, looked it up, and I got them things that were appropriate. And when I told my coworker about this, that was the part about us being at lunch, she's like, they're kids. They don't need all these steps, which is true. They don't. but it's fun.
But we've talked about Delia's here before, and I think it's actually a really good example of a different generation's version of I need 80 steps to walk out the door.
Yep.
You know, we didn't need the eye glitter gel or the smoothing hairspray or the whatever bajillion steps that we were adding to our routine at that point. And people made the same argument. What do you need that for? Because it's interesting, because I'm trying all of these things. I mean, I'm not saying that you should overload yourself with like B vitamins in excess or whatever's too much in those things. But I think that the joy of experimentation isn't necessarily something that we should be squashing.
Agree. Plus, what I bought for them, I made sure it was safe for them. Because with skincare, so before I started doing the research for this episode, I have specific brands that I very much like. And I'm not going to go into naming them. There's like 2 or 3 or more brands that I really like. And I end up buying everything in their line because of the dang cute packaging. Which we're going to talk about packaging.
It goes a long way. It really does. I hate to admit it, but there are some things that I just absolutely am religious with because I just adore how the packaging looks.
Yes. So that brings me back to my own personal routine. It's a lot, and I counted it up when I first started doing this, and then I recounted it like 12 times, thinking, this cannot possibly be right. So my morning routine, which starts with washing my face and ends with my moisturizer, including those, has 15 steps. And that's all products.
That was unexpected.
Right, because what I consider to be the holy grail of skincare products, Korean skincare products, you know, there's like the 12 or 13 step routine. But I got sucked in, and now I have a 15-step routine, and I have a different 15-step routine for night.
It's your joy.
It is, sometimes. But you know what? In those routines, probably like 6 or 7 of the products I use both in the morning or evening. Like I like this certain toner, and I really like the snail mucin essences. But yeah, I have a lot of steps. And after doing all this research, I was like, maybe I should just pick my favorites. Not because they're hurting my skin. I feel lucky in the way that I can put a lot of random stuff on my face just to try it out, and it doesn't give me any bad effect. And it wasn't always like this. Like as a kid, you know, as a very little kid, my first product was Noxzema, the cream.
My gosh, I could smell it right now.
As a kid, like I didn't have a separate moisturizer or anything. I was also a kid in the very end of the 80s to the early 90s is when I used Noxzema.
Mm-hmm. Sucks, but I was a very oily child and still an oily adult, and so everybody was, oh, you'll enjoy that when you're older, which is true, actually, because it's far less work now, but that was hellish in high school. So way back when we worked at that place and we had a different boss, that boss was so convinced that I needed to use a much heavier moisturizer. Because remember, at that time they had 8 moisturizers. Mm-hmm. And at that time, we were taught to talk about them in order of lightest to heaviest. I mean, ask me back then, my routine was probably about 15 as well. Yeah. Okay, see, mine wasn't back then. Well, I did a face mask a lot because we had a million. Boredom. Yeah. But I was probably, I think using, if we're ordering the moisturizers, like 1 being the lightest to 8 being the heaviest, I think I was using number 3 because number 4 you could use in the store because the price point was unattainable even with our discount. Yeah, that was gold. Yeah, in a tub. So I used like number 3 or number 5 the most, and she was like, "You need an 8," and the smell of 8 killed me. Oh, it smelled like cooking. Mm-hmm. And not in a good way. No. I hate to say that they were right about anything, but especially now, 10 plus years removed, I use wildly heavy moisturizers. Well, that's 10 years of difference, though. I mean, that's true. That does make a difference. That is true. So all of this made me decide that I wanted to look up the history of skincare. The first thing that comes to mind is Egypt and Cleopatra. Yeah, absolutely. Right? The Egyptians really were light years ahead in cosmetics. I love Terry Jones documentaries. He did all these little short clips about like the history of love, the history of war. He'd dress up in the costumes. He would actually, kind of Monty Python it, or to be honest, Terry Jones it. That's amazing. But it always makes me think of the perfume pyramid thing. It was like a cone of wax that you would strap to your head and just allow to melt over you throughout the evening with your body heat. And it's sexy and you're trying to smell nice, but really in the practicality is like, well, hello there, sexy wax covered stranger. You smell intriguing.
I did not dive that deep into skincare. I kept it mostly focused on like popularity, but that's amazing and terrifying and horrible. Can you imagine? You're just like, somehow, this is my horror movie version. The wax like melts super quickly and your eyes are shut, and then your nostrils, and then your mouth, and then you can't.
There's so many things that could go wrong.
So, Egypt. So, here's what I found. The first recorded proof of a skincare regimen is found in Egypt around 3000 BC. They used the natural items that were readily available to them. Main ones being olive oil, called liquid gold. And if you've ever had a really good olive oil, that's so true.
Oh yeah, people have traded exclusively in olive oil in a lot of different scenarios.
Definitely used in Egypt along with ostrich eggs. They also used dough, which I was imagining like pizza dough. Obviously, that's not what they used, and whatever grains they had plus
I mean, that's gonna be wheat at that point.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I wonder how did they make it into a dough? I could have looked this up, but I figured you'd know. Because I'm like, do you just throw some water in it and that's dough?
Well, I mean, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish with it. I'm actually unfamiliar with this particular dough, but I mean, you'd mill it either yourself, which is a big pain in the ass, mortar and pestle.
You do that for fun.
Right, I do. Well, and for colds, variety of reasons. I've always loved just the feel of mortar and pestle, but it is actually useful for a lot of things.
Yeah.
Like if your coffee grinder breaks.
So they use dough. I imagine it would be like a face mask of sorts.
I would imagine it would have to be like a temporary, like a mask treatment thing. Although there is a lot of history of just completely coating one's face in a smooth coating, like egg whites, is quite common. Which it's the Botox problem. It's still a sign in the ancient world that somebody is really taking advantage of cosmetics if they can't make facial expressions. It's just because at this point they're trying not to crack the egg white. Now it's just because the Botox isn't allowing their muscles to move.
I have a product by, I think it's Peter Thomas Roth. It was the one that went viral like 5 or 6 years ago. This lady puts it on her like under eyes. They're a little puffy. And while she's like filming herself, the transformation is wild. So I put that on my forehead sometimes, but if you're not really careful, that's what happens. And it also starts to peel a little bit, like I imagine egg whites would.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You can put enough powder over it, but eventually it's just going to look like the dried out pine dough.
Yeah. Another thing they used was the essential oils they had available. And then milk. Everyone knows Cleopatra bathed in milk, right? Supposedly sour milk, which is interesting because like nowadays we know sour milk contains lactic acid, which is an alpha hydroxy acid. It's used in chemical peels today to smooth and tone your skin. So they were aware somehow sour milk made their skin super soft and smooth.
And that's another case of just seeing the effect of something through trial and error and not really knowing the full scientific background behind it.
They knew it worked.
Observation is scientific method.
The rumor is that Cleopatra kept up to 700 donkeys in her palace/estate for this purpose of being able to like soak. Does this bring Elizabeth Taylor to mind for anyone? I haven't seen the movie, but I saw a picture of her in her Cleopatra movie in the milk bath.
There's this apocryphal story that Mary Queen of Scots would only bathe in red wine because she was an immoral hussy, and so it was one of those propaganda stories. And like, look how profligate she is.
I bet if it was true, the reason would be because there was a belief, which we're going to talk about, that what you ingested was what would give you color. So like eating rose petals would give you rosy cheeks. Mm-hmm. They were also doing combos like sand and aloe vera for exfoliation, honey and the milk bath for hydration, clay mixed in with your olive oil paste to make a really good scrub for the skin.
It's really cool how long-lived some things really are.
It really is. They also were really good at doing like the sour milk, but mixing it with like a patchouli for antibacterial properties and, zits. Same with using honey because it has the antibacterial properties. Even the probiotics in yogurt, which to me, I'm like sour milk, yogurt, sure, sounds the same. I'm sure it's probably a step or two removed.
Yeah, no, it's same family, different branch.
The Egyptians, unfortunately, also pioneered the use of white lead face creams.
That comes back to plague people for absolute ever.
ever, ever, ever. So it was like, oh, hey, this like clears up my spots and is like gives me a great texture and tone. And it set like a trend that, like you just said, will go throughout history.
And it's so unfortunate that some of the things that are the very worst for us look like they're really good for us for just long enough to where you get used to it. I was watching a thing about mercury being used to treat syphilis, and the reason that at least one of the reasons that it was so ubiquitous for so long, even though it will kill you arguably as quickly as the syphilis, was that for a little while its short-term effects counteracted the short-term effects of syphilis. So it looked as though it was effective, just long enough to kill you.
Nice. All right, my timeline kind of just goes out the window at this point, so bear with me. So the Romans liked their bathhouses. That's something they're kind of known for.
It's a very communal activity.
Yeah, and they would add sulfur to the hot water, which we know that will help with inflammation and killing bacteria. So
a little bit like chlorinating the pool.
Exactly. So somehow they knew that kept people from getting as sick or whatever.
And you can observe that from natural springs.
Throughout the Middle Ages, women were using a lot of plant-based things. There's the aloe vera again, rosemary, cucumber, things that would be used just to cleanse the skin, including something we're going to see a lot of, balms made of animal fat, vinegar-based toners, and then face masks, basically, that have flowers, seeds, leaves, other plants.
When you have the leisure time to pay attention to your skin, you're using what's around you.
Mm-hmm. And then there is a French poem from the 14th century. And is it the book or the poem title?
The poem is called Romance de la Rose.
Yes. That says they're basically really into Dr. Pimple Popper way before their time. So this line from it says, if her hands are not fair and unblemished, but marred by spots and pimples, she ought not to leave these alone, but use a needle to remove them.
Interesting.
And they didn't wash their hands back then, so you probably just made it way worse.
Well, you do, just not in the same way.
That
totally makes me think of the anchoresses. The anchoresses were nuns that were sort of like a hermit within the community. They're walled up within the church, and they're that's a whole episode in itself. But people bring them food and they observe the services, and then they're sort of the most meditative, isolated of nuns. And there's this prescription in one of that, it's called the Ancrine Rule. It reminds me so much of this because of the detail in which they're observing, like what a woman's skin should be. Your hands should be ragged from scratching your own grave out, basically.
Wow.
It's the line.
Wow. Okay. Imagine though, like you're the head nun and someone's just getting on your nerves, and you're like, wow. The Lord has told me.
Got an opening for an anchoress. Isn't that wild?
That's terrible and scary. I mean, unless you're into it.
There's a flip side to that where they were allowed to talk to more sections of the community than just women in general were a lot of times. They were brought materials for crafting, which they then sold for the good of their parish. It's not necessarily a cut and dry, we dropped you in the oubliette and we're never coming back. It's arguably to the right constitution and opportunity.
It is true when you put it that way. All right, so we're going to jump again in time. We're going to go to ancient China. They were really into being as pale as possible because, same with many other cultures, pale skin meant you were spending most of your time indoors.
Yeah, mark of status that you're not having to spend all of your waking hours feeding yourself.
Exactly. So if you're naturally of darker skin, whether it's really from sun exposure or just because melanin and DNA and all those things, then that doesn't matter. You are considered basically a bit of a lower social status. Even if you were born to like the richest people ever, if your skin's too dark, like nobody's going to want to put you as their first choice to get married to. Yeah, that's right. An author I've mentioned on here before who wrote The Poppy Wars and Babel and Yellowface.
I am so excited to read Babel. I haven't gotten into it yet.
It's really good. I liked it. So I really loved her Poppy Wars trilogy, and the main character in that has been adopted because there's like some war that left a lot of orphans, and their empress encourages people to adopt. So she's adopted, and she doesn't know where she's from, but she's got a lot darker skin than anyone else in her village, and so she's constantly looked down on. So China like 3 main things: exfoliating, brightening, and moisturizing. They used rice water a lot, which contains starch and various vitamins and proteins. So Chinese rice water, which would be either when they washed the rice or boiled it, but the rice water is going to have starch and various vitamins and proteins, good for their skin. And then they had bath beans, and I saw a picture of them, and they look like tiny balls of poo, but they're basically a tiny bath bomb made of soybean powder. But it does have something in it that has estrogen. So interesting. Yeah.
Almost like how everyone I know takes folic acid for their skin.
And funny thing about soy is, like, if you've ever had breast cancer, you have to be careful with your soy because of the extra estrogen.
Yeah.
They thought that the way you looked came from like what you absorbed. So this is where we get the rose petals give you rosy cheeks, and as a recorded history.
That's a pretty universal opinion through a lot of time periods, because it's like how you smelled in medieval Europe denoted your morality. Saints were supposedly just scented to high heaven, literally.
And then around 400 BCE-ish, we start getting the use of lead and mercury in China to lighten your skin. And it's weird because at that time, they were even fairly aware of how toxic it could be. Like, people were dying, but they really liked the results.
Exactly. It's the same thing. You have good enough results for long enough that people get used to it and are disinclined to admit any bad effects.
Absolutely. Moving back over to Europe, the medieval era, at that time, people are kind of avoiding water. And if you've watched literally any TV show set in any medieval-ish point, they're just drinking wine all the time.
And that's a yes and a no. It's not that they're not drinking water, it's that potable water is less available, and it's not considered weird to add alcohol in as your
cleansing agent.
As a supplement. And it's not that everyone's walking around hammered all the time, but you have part of your wifely duties is brewing the beer for the house, and so you have like low level beer for those kinds of things.
Makes sense, because even in, for example, the Bible, Paul writes, "Dear person, be sure to drink some wine for your stomach," because it was also like, you've ever heard like, don't drink the water. Well, it's because you're going to get your dysentery on, and it's not pleasant. Exactly. It's not pleasant.
We've talked about dysentery.
Yes. So they were correct in their probably unscientific, but correct belief that water carried diseases. So, like Rose just mentioned, it was all about the scent. The more like pungent, which sounds bad, but it doesn't have to just be bad smells, the more pungent aroma and herbal remedies, ointments, or creams you could get, the better off.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's what we were talking about. The smell is much more incorporated in your impression of a thing.
Yep. And they even had like face masks at this time as well. Lots of grinding of like seeds, leaves, flowers, mixing them with honey, things like that.
Yeah, the odd sparrow liver.
Gross.
A lot of creativity.
So moving into the Renaissance, people again are still obviously using things they can easily access, like, love this one, bread soaked in rose water to soothe the puffy skin or eyes.
To be honest, I would say that would work. I mean, I do
absolutely
it with green tea bags.
Absolutely. Oatmeal boiled in vinegar at this time was a very popular way to take care of your breakouts.
Also solid. You got a little exfoliation, a little bit of acidity there.
Then we've got Queen Elizabeth I. She brought the super whitening skincare kind of back into the spotlight of her reaches, and that is because at age 29, she had an almost lethal, it seems, case of smallpox, which left scars on her.
She did definitely have
on her face.
Scars. It's conjectured that it was less of a daily wear thing than as a part of her presentation as Gloriana. She did one of the best jobs of presenting this superhuman image, Gloriana, the Virgin Queen.
Yes.
And so a lot of the representations, you get that very, very white face paint. It's debatable whether it was like an everyday, she always did it thing.
Well, possible.
But it didn't
because
exactly.
It was cyclical.
Mm-hmm.
So you get these pox. So Queen Elizabeth is using a combo of basically vinegar and what it was called a lead-based whitening foundation, which was made of powder. She would use that to cover the pox, but it also like created more problems. Like it could create sores and open sores. And y'all, they weren't washing it off their face every day.
Oh no, you're wiping that off with a cloth, and yeah, putting lead directly on those types of sores is absolutely a cyclical effect. It's a terrible idea.
And so a lot of times you would just end up with like, you wipe it off with a cloth, but it's like a lead paste and it doesn't come off very easily. And when you really get in there to try to scrub it off on your, like, I don't know, if you're Queen Elizabeth, it's probably more, but like maybe quarterly shower, the best way to get it off is urine. Well, it's not really coming off easily when you wipe it off with a cloth. Again, if you're Queen Elizabeth, you could probably have help with
Someone else is doing your wiping.
So people end up wearing layers and layers and layers of lead-based powder into their face. The layers and layers would lead to sores, open sores, cover more with more powder, ulcers, and then you could even get like facial muscle paralysis and face tremors.
Now imagine the combination of that with advanced syphilis that's only being treated with mercury. You're also probably losing your nose in that scenario.
I would just like to point out how much this seems like when people go overboard with like cosmetic surgeries, which I'm not opposed to. If I can afford it, I'd be doing it. But when it's gotten to the point where like their nose is falling apart because so much of it's been removed and half their face is frozen with Botox.
It's a really similar problem. All right, guys, this is where we're going to take a short break.
Fellow tea lovers, before you go, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.